a glittering mansion, a night of luxury and betrayal. When a pregnant wife walks into her own home, expecting love, her millionaire husband slaps her across the face in front of cameras, guests, and his pregnant mistress. Then, in front of everyone, he declares he's choosing the mistress and throws his wife out into the rain. That humiliation should have broken her, but it didn't. 1 year later, she returns, calm and unshakable, carrying ironclad evidence that will destroy him and expose every secret behind his empire. What follows is a storm of betrayal, revenge, and justice sharper than glass. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming until we dive in. Tell us what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The chandeliers above the marble hall shimmered like frozen fire. Every surface gleamed with gold and glass, and the hum of conversation mixed with the soft rhythm of violins. Waiters moved carefully between tables carrying champagne, their steps rehearsed and precise. In the center of the room, a banner read, "Celebrating New Beginnings." Guests smiled, unaware that the evening was about to fracture into something unforgettable. Amelia arrived at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting gently on her 7-month belly. She had dressed carefully that night, in a soft blue gown that shimmered under the lights. Someone had sent a message that her husband wanted her to attend, that it was important, that it concerned family. The invitation had felt cold and strange, but she had come. The moment she appeared, the crowd began to whisper. Faces turned toward her. Damien Cross, standing near the grand piano, froze for a heartbeat before forcing a smile. The millionaire looked immaculate in his tailored suit, a symbol of success and authority. His jaw tightened as Amelia descended the steps. Behind him, Cassandra stood close, one hand resting on her own visible pregnancy, her lips curved in a knowing smile. The air thickened. The music faltered, then stopped entirely when Damien raised his hand. The silence that followed was so complete that Amelia could hear her own heartbeat echoing inside her chest. She stopped a few steps from him, confused by the tension around her. "You asked me to come," she said softly, her voice trembling but polite. Damien's eyes were unreadable. The crowd sensed the shift before it happened. He stepped forward, his expression sharp with anger and something colder. Without warning, his hand struck across her face. The sound cracked through the hall like glass breaking. Gasps erupted from the guests. The champagne glasses in a waiter's hand slipped and shattered on the floor. Amelia stumbled backward, clutching her cheek. The pain spread like fire, then faded into numb disbelief. Her free hand instinctively moved to protect her stomach. The room blurred. She looked up at him, searching for any trace of reason or regret. None appeared. Damien's voice came low but clear, amplified by the stillness around them. He declared that he was finished living a lie, that he was choosing the woman who carried his real child. The words sliced through the silence. A ripple of shock passed through the guests like a wave. For a long second, no one breathed. Cassandra stepped forward beside him, her red gown shimmering like blood under the chandeliers. She rested her palm on her belly and smiled as if she had just been crowned. The photographers, too stunned to lower their cameras, kept shooting. Flashes lit the scene like lightning. Amelia's vision swam in white bursts of light. The sting on her skin mixed with humiliation so deep it felt physical. She tasted salt and realized she had started to cry. She tried to speak, but her voice collapsed before it reached her lips. The air in the hall felt heavy, pressing against her chest. Damien turned away from her, lifting a glass from the nearest table. He toasted to truth and new beginnings, pretending she was no longer standing there. Laughter rose nervously from a few corners, people too afraid or too obedient to challenge him. Others stared, frozen, unsure if this was madness or performance. The violinist, still holding his bow mid-air, had tears in his eyes. Amelia blinked hard, forcing her body to stay upright. Every instinct told her to run, but pride anchored her feet. Her fingers gripped the edge of a table to steady herself. The floor beneath her seemed to shift. Someone whispered her name. Someone else muttered that she should leave before it got worse. The murmur spread like static. She turned her face slightly, so the bruise on her cheek caught the light, and for a moment the crowd saw what she was. Not a woman defeated, but a woman stunned into silence. Damien's expression remained composed, though his pulse throbbed visibly at his temple. Power had always protected him, and he believed it would again. He thought the headlines tomorrow would praise his honesty, call him courageous for following his heart. Cassandra leaned against him, her chin lifted high, radiating triumph. Her hand brushed against his arm in a gesture meant to mark territory, not comfort. Together, they looked like the winners of a cruel game. The sound of Amelia's shallow breathing filled the quiet between camera clicks. She could feel hundreds of eyes pressing down on her, judging, pitying, or pretending not to see. The chandeliers swayed slightly above, their crystals casting fractured patterns on the polished floor. A waiter knelt to clean the spilled champagne, the scent of alcohol rising into the air. The sharpness of it mixed with perfume and tension until the entire hall smelled of something sour. She lifted her chin just enough to meet Damien's gaze one last time. His eyes were distant, stripped of warmth, already focused on the woman beside him. That absence of humanity hit harder than the slap itself. Her lips parted, but the words died before sound. The weight of humiliation crushed her breath. Her knees weakened. The blue fabric of her gown pooled at her feet as she sank halfway to the floor, clutching her stomach for balance. A guest reached forward as if to help, but stopped when Damien's glare cut across the room. No one moved. Cameras kept flashing. Somewhere a glass tipped over, and the soft tinkle of breaking crystal carried through the silence like a faint melody of ruin. Amelia's reflection shimmered in the shards, a distorted image of a woman once proud, now trembling under chandeliers that suddenly felt unbearably bright. The silence stretched until even the violinist lowered his bow. Damien stood still, the perfect statue of confidence, watching her collapse as if it proved his point. Cassandra's smile widened. The crowd waited for someone, anyone, to speak, but no voice rose. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, from somewhere near the bar, a waiter's hand slipped. A wine glass fell and shattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed sharply through the hall, breaking the spell, but not the silence. Amelia's fingers brushed against the shards beside her shoes. She did not pick them up. She only stared at them, eyes unfocused, tears trembling on her lashes. Around her, the world kept spinning. Flashes, whispers, footsteps retreating, while she remained frozen in the middle of it all. Her pulse thudded painfully against her throat. The lights dimmed slightly as the music failed to restart. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Then Damien turned back toward the reporters, his mouth curling into the faintest smile. He straightened his cuffs, completely unbothered by the chaos he had created. The red light of a nearby camera blinked steadily, recording every second. Amelia lifted her head just enough to see that small, merciless light reflecting in his eyes. It glowed like proof of everything broken between them. The crowd fell into absolute stillness. And in that silence, heavy and endless, the last sound was the echo of the glass still rolling across the marble floor, stopping near her trembling hand. The storm began the same night the video spread. Within hours, the clip of Damien Cross striking his pregnant wife at the gala filled every screen. News anchors repeated the sound of the slap again and again, slowing it down, replaying the frozen image of Amelia's stunned face. Hashtags multiplied. Talk show hosts debated whether she had provoked him. Strangers traded opinions as if it were a sport. The mansion lights burned through the rain while her name turned into a headline: "The fallen wife of a millionaire." By midnight, the servants had been ordered to remove her things. A security guard stood by the door, silent, rain dripping from his cap. Damien's assistant handed her a small duffel bag already packed, as if they had prepared for this moment days ago. Inside were only a few clothes, her phone, and her prenatal vitamins. She wanted to ask for the baby's ultrasound photo, but the words stuck in her throat. Cassandra's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. Amelia stepped outside. The cold hit her skin like punishment. The driveway glistened with rain. The mansion behind her glowed in gold light, its windows filled with shadows moving to music. Somewhere in there, Damien was probably giving another toast, pretending that everything was under control. He had told the press earlier that evening that it was a private matter. In his mind, the slap was simply closure, a way to end an inconvenience. He called it decisive. He always liked that word. Amelia walked slowly down the path, one arm wrapped protectively around her stomach. Each step felt heavy, the gravel slick beneath her shoes. Thunder rolled across the hills, and the iron gates opened with a reluctant groan. Beyond them, the road stretched into darkness, her breath fogged in the cold air. When she reached the end of the property, she turned for one last look. The mansion appeared almost unreal through the rain, like a painting she had once loved but could never step into again. A flash of lightning illuminated Cassandra standing at a window, watching her go. Even from that distance, Amelia saw the faint curve of a smile. She walked until her body trembled from exhaustion. No car stopped for her. By the time she reached the bus stop on the empty highway, her dress clung to her legs, and her hair was soaked. She sank onto the bench and waited, shivering. The baby shifted slightly inside her, a small reminder of life still trying to stay. She whispered to her belly, promising safety she wasn't sure she could give. A bus came, its headlights cutting through the rain. The driver said nothing when he saw her, only nodded. She paid in crumpled bills and sat in the last row. City lights appeared 2 hours later, blurring through the wet window. She found a cheap motel near the station. The woman at the front desk recognized her face from the news but didn't say anything. Amelia thanked her quietly and climbed the stairs to a narrow room that smelled of damp carpet and disinfectant. The door closed behind her with a hollow click. Inside, the silence felt heavier than the storm outside. She dropped the bag onto the bed and pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard. The ache in her chest deepened each time she remembered the flash of cameras, the disbelief on people's faces, the sound of glass shattering. When she finally turned on the television, her own image stared back at her. The news called her the disgraced ex-wife. Commentators speculated about money, about jealousy, about mental health. Not one word about humiliation or fear. Damien's publicist had already crafted a new narrative. He was starting fresh with Cassandra, the woman who was carrying his heir. The phrase repeated on every channel until it felt like a curse. Cassandra, glowing in staged photos, spoke about love conquering judgment. Her belly, round and prominent, became the symbol of their so-called future. Amelia muted the sound. Her reflection appeared on the dark screen. Her cheek still bore the faint red mark from his hand. The bruise had blossomed across her skin, tender to the touch. She traced it with her fingertips, not out of vanity but disbelief. The man who once promised to protect her had left her in the rain. The man she had built her life around had turned her into a story for strangers to consume. Her hands trembled. She turned away from the television and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded curtain. Outside, the storm refused to stop. The rain struck the window in relentless patterns, like fingers tapping to remind her that time was still moving. Water leaked from the ceiling into a small puddle near the nightstand. She placed a towel there and listened to it drip. Each sound felt like another second stretching too long. The baby shifted again, a small flutter beneath her palm. Fear rushed through her, not for herself, but for that fragile heartbeat depending on her to stay calm. She inhaled slowly, pressing her hand more firmly against her belly, whispering words she didn't fully believe. "It's okay, we're safe now." The phone on the nightstand vibrated once, then again. Messages from unknown numbers filled the screen. Some were sympathetic, others cruel. She turned it face down. Her name was now a trend, her humiliation archived forever. She closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The image of Damien's calm expression at the moment he hit her kept replaying, stripped of sound but sharp in detail. Every blink brought back the gleam of the chandelier, the smell of champagne, the cold marble beneath her knees. In the early morning, the storm eased to a drizzle. The city outside began to stir. Amelia opened the curtain slightly. Neon signs reflected on the wet pavement, stretching like broken rainbows. A newspaper boy threw a rolled-up edition against a nearby wall. It burst open in the puddle. The front page showed Damien and Cassandra smiling beneath the headline, "The New Power Couple." Her throat tightened. She turned away before the tears could fall. The small table near the bed held a cup of cold tea from the vending machine downstairs. She wrapped her hands around it for warmth. The baby's faint movement reminded her again that she could not afford to collapse completely. She drew a long breath, but it trembled out of her before she could hold it. The room felt smaller now, the walls closer, as if trying to keep her contained. She rose slowly, walked to the window, and opened it just a crack. The air smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust. Far below, headlights passed, one after another, their glow fading into the distance. The sound of tires cutting through water made her chest ache. She rested her forehead against the cool glass, eyes following the line of light until it vanished into darkness. Her hand slid from the window to her stomach, fingers trembling, her lips moved, barely a whisper, carried away by the fading rain. "Mom won't fall," she said, voice breaking into silence. The city lights blurred again, soft and endless, as the night settled into quiet. Morning light poured through the blinds of a television studio, painting the white floor with stripes of gold. Damian Cross sat in a tailored gray suit, posture straight, expression calm. The interviewer smiled at him with professional warmth, her voice smooth and practiced. "Mr. Cross," she said, "there has been a great deal of public reaction to the incident last week. What would you like to say to the world tonight?" Cameras focused on him, red lights glowing. Damian adjusted his cufflinks before he spoke. "I believe," he began slowly, "that sometimes in life we must make painful decisions for the greater good. My marriage ended because we were no longer compatible. Amelia is a good person, but our lives have taken different directions. This separation was a civilized choice, not an act of cruelty." His tone carried the ease of a man performing for applause. He paused for effect. "People grow apart. It happens." The interviewer nodded sympathetically, eager to feed the narrative. "You're saying it was mutual?" "Of course," Damian replied with a faint smile. "I wish her peace. I hope the public gives her privacy." The broadcast room went quiet for a second before the host moved to the next question. Damian folded his hands, satisfied. The world would see his composure, not his violence. His publicist, standing just behind the camera, exhaled in relief. Cassandra, waiting in the hallway, scrolled through social media on her phone and smirked at the live comments praising Damian's dignified response. She tilted her head, touching the diamond earrings that gleamed against her skin. In the screen's reflection, she caught her own smile and widened it. Outside the studio, rain had stopped. A limousine waited. Damian stepped into it, loosening his tie. Cassandra followed, her perfume filling the small space. He poured himself a drink and checked his phone. Messages flooded in, investors, acquaintances, reporters, all congratulating him on his strength and clarity. He leaned back, savoring it. He truly believed he had buried the past. Meanwhile, across town, Amelia sat in a small cafe tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore. The hum of machines mixed with the chatter of strangers who didn't recognize her. She kept her cap low, her scarf pulled tight. On the table lay a folded newspaper she couldn't bring herself to open. The job listings were printed in small gray text, and her tired eyes blurred the lines. Her fingers ached from writing applications that went unanswered. The waitress, a kind older woman, placed a cup of tea beside her and said, "You look like you need rest, honey." Amelia smiled faintly but said nothing. Rest was a luxury she could not afford. Her back still hurt from nights on the motel mattress. She had moved into a small sublet, 2 rooms, 1 window that overlooked a brick wall. It wasn't home, but it was quiet. Later that afternoon, she visited the clinic for a routine checkup. Dr. Miller, a familiar face from before everything fell apart, frowned at her medical chart. "You're underweight," he said gently, "and your blood pressure's low. You need to slow down. Stress isn't good for the baby." Amelia nodded, eyes fixed on the ultrasound monitor. The faint pulse of life flickered across the screen. For a moment, she forgot the cameras, the headlines, the noise. She smiled, softly. "Promise me you'll rest," the doctor added. She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed on the tiny heartbeat, her lips pressed together. When the appointment ended, she walked out without scheduling the next one. The city was gray and restless, cars honking, people rushing past her as if time moved differently for them. She blended into the crowd, her small frame lost in the rhythm of strangers who didn't know her story. Across billboards and magazines, Damian's new image gleamed. He was photographed at charity galas, hand in hand with Cassandra, whose pregnancy was now celebrated as a miracle. They looked radiant under studio lights. Headlines read, a fresh start for the Cross Empire. On social media, Cassandra posted photos of their new home with captions about love and gratitude. Thousands of comments praised her strength. She replied to each one with a perfect heart emoji. In a small grocery store, Amelia saw their picture on the cover of a glossy magazine. She froze for a moment, her hands tightening around the handle of her basket. The cashier didn't notice her expression as he scanned her items. She paid quickly and left, the bag trembling in her grip. That night, she sat by the single window of her apartment. The walls smelled faintly of paint and rain. Her laptop was open to a half-written resume. Words swam across the screen, meaningless. She closed it. The television flickered in the corner. The sound turned low. Damien's interview replayed again, his voice smooth, detached. He spoke about compassion, maturity, moving forward. Amelia reached for the remote but couldn't look away. Her reflection appeared in the dark glass between scenes. The woman she saw didn't look like the one from the photographs of old charity dinners and red carpets. Her eyes had grown duller, the curve of her shoulders smaller. But somewhere inside, beneath the exhaustion, a small thread of defiance still existed, thin but unbroken. On the screen, Damien leaned toward Cassandra during a segment about family values. The audience laughed when she joked about his cooking. The camera caught them holding hands. They looked flawless, rehearsed, unshakable. The reporter ended with a line that would appear in every headline the next day. They are the picture of renewal. A few days later, a newspaper appeared at Amelia's doorstep. She didn't subscribe to any, but someone had slipped it under the door. The front page showed Damien kissing Cassandra at the gates of the old mansion. The headline read, "Love Reborn in the House of Cross." The paper trembled in her hands. Her fingers crushed the edges until the ink bled onto her skin. The kiss on the photograph blurred under the pressure. Her chest tightened, breath shallow. The sound of rain started again outside, soft and unrelenting. She pressed the paper into a ball, the crumpled pages creasing like her own fragile resolve. She rose from the chair and moved to the window. The city below was calm, indifferent. Moonlight slipped through the thin curtain, casting pale light over her bruised cheek. She sat down again, the newspaper still clenched in her fist. The night pressed close, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rain against glass. Amelia opened her hand slowly, the crushed paper falling to the floor. Her eyes followed it until the motion stopped. The moonlight caught her profile, highlighting the fading mark on her face. She exhaled once, not in anger, but in quiet surrender to the weight of the moment. Outside, the rain thickened again, whispering against the window pane, filling the small apartment with a sound that felt like waiting. The rain had turned colder by the time Amelia reached the hospital. The sky was a dull, colorless gray, and the air smelled of wet asphalt. She moved carefully through the sliding doors, her hands pressed against her belly, as if trying to keep something precious from slipping away. The receptionist glanced up, recognized her face from old news stories, and quickly looked down again. "Emergency?" she asked quietly. Amelia nodded. Her voice no longer carried sound. They took her to a narrow room with walls the color of fading paper. The fluorescent light above flickered. Machines were rolled in beside her bed, their wires forming a tangle of colorless vines. The nurse adjusted the monitor and attached the sensors. The rhythmic sound of the fetal heartbeat began, faint but steady, a fragile echo of life. Amelia stared at the screen as though she could will it to grow stronger. Her breath came shallow, and her fingers clenched the sheet. Hours passed. The storm outside rattled the windows. Nurses came and went, adjusting drips, checking numbers, whispering. One of them offered to call someone for her, but she shook her head. There was no one to call. Her phone lay in her bag, turned off since that night. The nurse touched her arm gently, then left. The door clicked shut. The room fell into a hum of machines and rain. Amelia lay still, her mind floating somewhere between pain and disbelief. She tried to focus on the rhythm of the heartbeat, counting each pulse as though numbers could hold time in place. Every few minutes, the monitor beeped unevenly, and her chest tightened in fear. She whispered small prayers she could not finish. Somewhere deep inside, she still believed that if she stayed awake, if she refused to surrender to exhaustion, her child would stay alive. Midnight came. The doctor entered, a middle-aged man with weary eyes. He spoke softly, but the words blurred together: complications, blood pressure, oxygen levels dropping. Amelia nodded, unable to understand the language of despair. The doctor adjusted the settings, gave orders to the nurses, and then disappeared behind the curtain again. The sound of his shoes faded down the hallway. The rain beat harder against the glass. The pain came in waves, sharp and uncontrollable. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Her hands searched for something to hold, finding only the edge of the mattress. Sweat mixed with tears, but she barely felt her own body anymore. In the middle of the pain, she remembered the photograph of Damien kissing Cassandra that she had crumpled days before. She wondered if he was awake now, somewhere far away, sleeping peacefully beside another woman while she fought to keep their child alive. The thought came without anger, only a hollow ache that no longer reached her heart. The monitor's beeping slowed. The nurses hurried in, their voices firm but low. One of them called for the doctor. Another adjusted the oxygen mask. The room filled with the quick shuffle of shoes and the metallic click of instruments. Amelia turned her head slightly toward the sound of the machine. The heartbeat faltered, each tone weaker than the last. She reached out a trembling hand toward the screen, as if touch could bring it back. The nurse held her shoulders. "Breathe," she said. "Please keep breathing." Then the sound stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any cry. The doctor exhaled quietly and nodded to the nurses. One reached over and turned off the monitor. The light on the machine faded from green to nothing. Amelia stared at the blank screen, her eyes unfocused. No one spoke for a long time. Then someone whispered condolences, and the curtain was drawn. Hours passed again. The nurses cleaned the room. They covered her child in a small white cloth and placed it gently on a nearby table, as if the gesture could lessen the cruelty of reality. Amelia watched without blinking. The world had narrowed to the quiet space between her heartbeat and the storm outside. When a nurse asked if she wanted to hold the baby, she shook her head slowly. Her body trembled from exhaustion, but her face remained still, drained of all color. She stayed awake until dawn, unable to sleep. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle. A pale light crept through the blinds, turning everything gray. The nurses changed shifts. One of them placed a plastic bracelet on the table, the tiny newborn band that was never used. It read Baby Cross in neat black letters. Amelia stared at it for a long time, then turned her face to the window. The city outside looked blurred and far away. By morning, the doctor came back with a clipboard. His expression was polite but distant. "You'll be discharged soon," he said. "Someone will come with the paperwork." His words floated above her like faint echoes. She nodded once. When he left, she tried to sit up, but the movement sent pain through her abdomen. She waited until it eased, then reached for the glass of water beside her bed. Her hand shook so much that the water spilled onto the sheet. Later, a young nurse entered holding several documents. "We just need your signature for the release," she said gently. "And, Mrs. Cross, there's an issue with the billing. The insurance attached to your file has been cancelled." Amelia's lips parted, but no words came. The nurse hesitated. "I'm sorry. You might need to handle the payment directly." She nodded again, her eyes dry. She already understood. Damien had cut everything, every form of support, every trace of obligation. She took the pen, her fingers stiff and cold. The ink bled slightly as she wrote her name. Each letter felt heavier than the last. When she finished, the nurse thanked her and left the room quietly. Amelia placed the pen down beside the unused baby bracelet. For a long time, she stared at both objects, one representing duty, the other loss. Then she slid the bracelet closer to the edge of the table and left it there. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, and walked toward the small wardrobe. Her bag hung from the chair, still half-packed. She zipped it, her movements automatic. Before leaving, she turned once more toward the bed. The sheets were freshly folded, the space beside the pillow empty. Only the faint impression of her head remained. She looked around as if trying to memorize the silence, then stepped out into the corridor. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and rain. A window at the end showed a slice of the gray morning sky. Her steps echoed softly. No one stopped her. She reached the exit doors, and the sound of rain grew louder, washing against the pavement outside. She paused, her hand resting on the glass. The world beyond the hospital shimmered with puddles and passing cars. As she pushed the door open, the wind carried the scent of rain onto her face. Behind her, the nurses began cleaning the room she had left, the small bracelet still on the table, catching a glint of pale light. Amelia's fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. The rain fell steadily, patient and endless, filling the silence that followed her out the door. The year passed quietly, like a tide withdrawing from the shore. Time did not heal Amelia, but it hardened her. After leaving the hospital, she took a job arranged by a doctor who had pitied her silence. It was at a small foundation supported by an international charity that funded programs for women who had lost children. Her first weeks were filled with routine, sorting files, translating reports, answering phone calls. She rarely spoke, but she listened to everything. Numbers, names, schedules. She absorbed them the way a dry sponge drinks water. Her diligence caught attention. Within months, the director trusted her with budgets and correspondence. She handled every document with precision. Her English and French were fluent, her handwriting careful. When a senior investor from Europe visited the foundation, he noticed her composure. He told her she reminded him of someone who had already been through the worst and could now only rise. A few weeks later, the organization recommended her for a position at a private investment group expanding into humanitarian real estate. Its name was A. Ward Holdings. She used her maiden name for the application. No one recognized the woman once humiliated under chandeliers. To them, she was new. For a year, she worked quietly under that name. She learned the rhythms of finance, the language of mergers and contracts. She studied at night, took certification courses, listened to conference calls, where men argued about numbers like soldiers in war. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried weight. The firm saw in her a rare steadiness. When the board decided to expand its North American portfolio, she was appointed as regional representative. It was an unexpected honor, but she accepted without hesitation. Her first assignment would be in New York, where the company had invested heavily in a project called the Aurora Tower. On a pale morning in March, Amelia stood in front of her apartment mirror. The woman who stared back was almost unrecognizable. Her face was thinner, her eyes clearer, her expression composed. She adjusted the collar of her white suit, tied her hair into a smooth knot, and whispered the words she had practiced for months. "It's time." Huh. New York glimmered below her plane window as it descended. The skyline looked almost unreal, sharp and glittering in the afternoon sunday. Billboards around Midtown flashed images of Damian Cross, smiling with the confidence of a man who had erased his past. Headlines praised his visionary leadership and return to form. The same man who had once thrown her out into the rain now stood on magazine covers beside phrases like resilience and redemption. The press swarmed the entrance of the Midtown Grand Hotel, where the Cross Development Summit was taking place. A red banner stretched across the lobby. The Aurora Tower, a new dawn for the city. Cameramen, journalists, and investors crowded inside. The chandeliers above gleamed like frozen suns. The air smelled of perfume and expensive confidence. Damian stood at the center of it all, perfectly tailored, smiling under the cameras. Cassandra sat in the first row, her black gown framing her like a queen at court. Their movements were rehearsed, their laughter light. They looked like the picture of success, untouched by scandal. The applause rose when Damian approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady through the microphone. "The Aurora Tower is more than steel and glass. It is a symbol of rebirth, of trust restored." His words carried the practiced charm that had once seduced entire rooms. The crowd listened, hanging on every syllable. Behind him, the giant screen showed digital renderings of a shining skyscraper rising into blue sky. He gestured toward a table stacked with folders. "Tonight, we also welcome our new international investors who have helped turn this dream into reality." The doors at the back of the hall opened with a slow, deliberate sound. Heads turned. A woman entered, her white suit catching the light. She walked forward, calm and unhurried. The rhythmic sound of her heels echoed against marble, slicing through applause. No one spoke. Damian looked up from the podium, his smile freezing for half a second before he found it again. She approached the stage. "Good evening," she said, her tone measured. I'm Amelia Ward, representing A. Ward Holdings, principal investors of the Aurora project. The silence that followed was absolute. Reporters looked at one another, unsure if they had heard correctly. Damien blinked once, twice. The name landed like a stone in his chest. Cassandra shifted in her seat, eyes narrowing. Amelia placed a sleek leather case on the table beside him. She opened it with calm precision and withdrew a stack of signed documents. The lights above reflected on the polished surface, illuminating the name of her company. "We appreciate the opportunity to work with Cross Development," she continued evenly. "Our firm values transparency and sustainability. We believe what rises must be built on truth." "Yeah, too." Cameras clicked rapidly now. Damien forced a smile. "Of course," he said softly, his voice cracking just enough for her to hear. "We are honored to have you here." She nodded once and extended her hand. He hesitated before taking it. Her handshake was cool, almost weightless, but it sent a shock through him. He remembered another moment, another hall filled with lights, another crowd watching him strike her. He quickly looked away. Reporters began calling questions. "Ward, can you tell us more about A. Ward Holdings?" "A global consortium," she replied. "We specialize in rebuilding projects that have faced public skepticism. Our focus is integrity." Her eyes lifted to meet Damien's. "We ensure that no foundation stands on deceit." The words hung in the air. Damien tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Cassandra's nails dug into her palm. The photographer nearest to them snapped a close-up, catching Amelia's face half in shadow, half in light. She gathered the documents into a neat stack and slid them across the table. "These are the finalized partnership terms," she said. "Please review them with your legal team." Her voice remained calm, each word perfectly enunciated. Damien glanced down. His eyes caught the signature on the last page. Amelia Ward Cross. The ink glistened under the spotlight. His hand tightened on the paper. His throat felt dry. The applause that began somewhere in the back of the hall sounded distant, distorted, like waves under glass. He looked up, but she had already stepped back from the podium. The cameras followed her, the white of her suit glowing against the dark suits surrounding her. The same woman he had thrown away now stood untouchable in front of his empire. She nodded once to the host and turned toward the exit. Each step echoed softly, deliberate, final. The crowd parted to let her through. Damien watched her go, his expression unreadable. When the doors closed behind her, the room exhaled. The photographers lowered their cameras. Damien remained still, his gaze locked on the table. The signature shimmered under the bright lights. A. Ward Holdings. The initials pressed into his mind like a scar. The applause died out. A heavy stillness settled over the hall. Damien stood alone on the stage, the sound of his own heartbeat filling the space between flashes of light. The cameras clicked one last time, and then everything went quiet. 3 days after the press conference, the city still hummed with talk of the mysterious investor who had appeared in white and vanished before the cameras. The story had become a quiet obsession among reporters, but no one knew her connection to Damien Cross. Inside the glass tower that housed Cross Development's headquarters, things were far less calm. The board of directors gathered for an emergency meeting called by Amelia Ward of A. Ward Holdings. The meeting room on the 42nd floor gleamed with cold light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a silent audience. Damien sat at the head of the long table, his expression carved from stone. Cassandra hovered near the wall, pretending composure. A few of the board members whispered to one another, papers trembling slightly in their hands. The atmosphere smelled of cologne, tension, and fear. Amelia entered without hurry. Her footsteps were soft against the marble, each one deliberate. She carried the same leather case she had used at the conference, its metal clasps glinting under the recessed lights. She placed it on the table before anyone spoke. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice even. "I realize you've been waiting for clarification about A. Ward Holdings' position." Damien leaned back, forcing a smile. "We're eager to move forward, Miss Ward. I assume you've reviewed the partnership terms?" "I have," she replied. "And I've also reviewed something else, something that concerns the integrity of this company." The room fell silent. Amelia opened the case and drew out a thick folder. She laid it flat and began to spread the contents across the table, a series of financial reports, emails, and signed documents. The paper made a faint, crisp sound that filled the stillness like rain against glass. "These," she said, "are internal transfer records from cross-development to a private account in the Cayman Islands dated 4 months ago. The account is registered under a company that does not exist outside of paper, Silverline Consulting. Its listed director is Miss Cassandra Moore." Cassandra's lips parted. "That's absurd," she whispered. Amelia ignored her. "The documents show unauthorized fund movements totaling $28 million. The transfers were disguised as subcontractor payments for the Aurora Tower project. I also have an audio recording made by an employee who was instructed to alter invoices." She pressed a small device, and a voice filled the room, Damien's, low and clear, saying, "No one will find it if the reports are merged before audit." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Damien's face stiffened, his fingers tightening on the armrest of his chair. The board members exchanged uneasy looks. One of them, a gray-haired man, leaned forward and asked, "Is this verified?" Amelia nodded once. "Every file has been authenticated by independent auditors in London. The originals are in safe custody. What you see now is a copy." Cassandra tried to stand. "You can't prove." Amelia's gaze met hers, calm and cutting. "I don't need to. The bank confirmations will arrive within the hour." Damien's voice broke through the tension. "This is slander," he said quietly. "You're twisting data for your own leverage." "I have no need for leverage," Amelia answered. "My firm invests in projects built on truth. When I joined this venture, I was told transparency was your core value. I simply held you to your own words." The lights above flickered slightly. Outside the windows, the city glowed beneath gathering clouds. The sound of rain began, faint at first, then stronger. It drummed against the glass like a pulse. One of the lawyers at the table cleared his throat. "Mr. Cross, perhaps we should review these documents in private," Amelia interrupted, her tone steady. "This is not a negotiation. It's disclosure. The board deserves to know before the authorities do." She placed a USB drive on the table. "Everything on this contains digital copies of the evidence, email trails, transaction logs, timestamps. It's what you would call steel proof." No one spoke. The words seemed to echo in the metallic quiet. Damien's jaw tightened. "Why now?" he asked. "Why come after me this way?" Amelia looked at him for the first time. "Because you thought silence erased what you did. It didn't. It only gave me time." Her voice was soft, but the weight behind it made the air feel heavy. The board members stared at her, some with unease, others with admiration. Cassandra's breathing quickened. Her hand trembled against the back of a chair. Damien stood suddenly, knocking his pen to the floor. "You're bluffing. You think a few papers and a recording can touch me? I've built this empire for 15 years. Amelia didn't move. "Empires fall faster than children die," she said quietly. The sentence landed like glass breaking. For a moment, even the rain seemed to stop. Damien's eyes flickered with something between rage and fear. His lips parted, but no words came. The boardroom door opened slightly as an assistant entered, carrying a folder. "The auditors are on line 1, he said nervously. Amelia turned back to the table. "I'll leave you to your call." She gathered the remaining documents into a neat pile and closed her case. Before she left, she addressed the board directly. "A. Ward Holdings will cooperate fully with any legal review. I expect a response within 48 hours. After that, the matter leaves this room." She walked toward the exit. Her heels struck the marble floor in steady rhythm. Behind her, the low murmur of panic began to rise, chairs shifting, voices colliding. Damien sank back into his seat, staring at the folder she had left behind. The company's logo glimmered under the fluorescent lights, its seal unbroken, its promise absolute. The storm outside intensified, rain streaming down the glass walls. Lightning flashed once, illuminating the reflection of Damien's pale face in the window, a man watching his own world crack. The USB drive sat in the center of the table, small and gleaming, like the single spark before a fire. Amelia reached the door and paused. She looked back briefly, her expression unreadable, her voice calm. "Truth has its own timing," she said. Then she stepped out, leaving the door half open behind her. Inside the room, no one moved. The rain grew louder, filling every corner of the silence. The lights flickered again, and the faint hum of the machines continued. the only sound left between accusation and collapse. By morning, the news had spread faster than the storm. Screens across the city flashed headlines in relentless succession. Cross-Empire under investigation. Anonymous investor exposes financial scandal. Aurora project frozen pending review. The media did not need confirmation. The rumors themselves were enough to ignite a fire. Within hours, reporters surrounded the entrance of Cross Development. Camera flashes burst like lightning, each one reflecting panic inside the glass tower. In his office on the top floor, Damien watched the coverage in silence. His reflection on the screen looked older, harder, and afraid. He switched channels, but every broadcast showed his face beside words like fraud, embezzlement, and criminal probe. His phone buzzed again and again. Board members, lawyers, publicists, everyone wanted to know what to say, how to react. He said nothing. The door burst open. Cassandra entered, her makeup smudged, her hair undone. "You said it was handled," she shouted. "You said she had nothing." Damien turned away from her. "Calm down." "Calm down?" She laughed bitterly. "They're freezing our accounts. The papers are showing my name, my company, everything. How could she have gotten those files?" He faced her, his jaw tight. "Someone inside must have given them to her. We'll find out who." Cassandra stepped closer. "She's destroying you, Damien, and me with you. You think anyone will believe I didn't know?" He rubbed his temples. "Stop talking, let me think." Outside the office, employees whispered in corridors. Security officers began escorting auditors through the building. The tension spread like smoke, impossible to contain. Amelia's words from the meeting still echoed in everyone's minds. Truth has its own timing. It seemed that time had arrived. Downstairs, the main lobby turned into chaos. Reporters pushed against the glass doors, shouting questions. "Mr. Cross, are the allegations true? Who is Amelia Ward? Did you falsify financial records?" Guards struggled to keep the press outside. Some employees slipped out through side exits, heads lowered, afraid of being filmed. Damien's assistant entered the office trembling. "Sir, the auditors from the finance ministry are here. They've brought subpoenas." He didn't move. "Tell them to wait. They said it's urgent." Cassandra gripped his arm. "If you don't face them now, it'll look like guilt." "What?" Damien snapped. "It already looks like guilt." The assistant flinched and left. The air in the office thickened. Cassandra began pacing. "You could call your father's contacts in the ministry," she said desperately. "They still owe you favors. If we stall this long enough—" He cut her off. "It's too late." His voice was quieter now. "She planned this for months. Every step." Cassandra sank into a chair. "So that's it? You give up?" He didn't answer. His phone rang again. The caller ID read Cross Financial Division. He let it ring. Then another call came, this time from his lawyer. He silenced it too. Below them, the crowd outside grew louder. Chants began, angry voices calling for accountability, for justice. Someone live-streamed the scene, and within minutes, millions were watching. A police car parked near the entrance. Blue lights pulsed against the windows. Cassandra stood abruptly. "I can't stay here." She grabbed her purse. "They'll drag me into this, Damien. I won't go down for you." He didn't stop her. She hesitated at the door, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he only stared out the window. She left without another word. The echo of her heels faded down the hall. Alone, he walked to the window. Rain had started again, thin streaks cutting across the skyline. From up here, the city looked distant, unreal, as if it no longer belonged to him. The giant billboard across the street that once displayed his smiling face now showed a news ticker reporting his collapse. His phone buzzed again, this time a message, "Press conference at noon. Board demands your appearance." He set the phone down and looked at the folder Amelia had left on his desk. The seal of A. Ward Holdings gleamed in silver. He picked it up, thumb tracing the edges, and opened it. Inside were the same pages from the meeting, the transfers, the signatures, the audit report. Each document was perfect, irrefutable. There was nothing left to explain. A knock came at the door. His publicist entered, pale and trembling. "They're live on every channel," she said. "Do you want to make a statement?" He stared at her blankly. "What would I say? That it's a misunderstanding, that you'll cooperate." He gave a hollow laugh. "Cooperate with what? My own downfall?" She didn't reply. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the ticking of the clock. Finally, she whispered, "They're waiting, sir." Then she left. At noon, Damien stepped into the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected his image from every side, endless copies of a man unraveling. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the noise of the crowd hit him like a wave. He adjusted his tie, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the podium that had been hastily set up for him in the lobby. Cameras turned, flashbulbs ignited. The light burned white against his skin. He cleared his throat, searching for words that no longer existed. "Thank you for coming," he said mechanically. "These allegations are—" He stopped. The words refused to form. Behind the crowd, a television screen displayed live footage from inside the financial ministry. Officials were speaking about new evidence, about criminal charges being prepared. Damien's voice faded. The reporters shouted over one another, their questions sharp and merciless. The sound grew into a roar. He looked out over the crowd, eyes scanning faces that once admired him. Now they looked at him with hunger, the hunger for scandal, for justice, for blood. He realized there was no version of this moment he could control. The cameras would record everything. The world would decide what came next. A hand touched his shoulder. One of his security staff leaned close. "Sir, the police want a word outside." He nodded faintly. The man guided him toward the exit, pushing through the chaos. The last thing Damien saw before the doors closed behind him was his own image on the television screen, frozen mid-sentence, the word allegations hanging beside his name. Outside, the air smelled of wet pavement and electricity. The sirens wailed in the distance. Across the street, the billboard flickered, its image shifting from his old advertisement to a news banner that read, "Cross Development Under Criminal Review." For a long moment, he stood still beneath the flashing lights, rain dripping from his hair. The crowd kept shouting his name, some in anger, some in disbelief. Inside the building, the folder from A. Ward Holdings remained on his desk, the pages slightly curled from humidity. The silver seal caught the light from the storm outside, gleaming faintly as thunder rolled over the city. The sound lingered, deep and unending, as if the sky itself had joined the chorus of collapse. Then came silence, the heavy, waiting kind that arrives just before everything changes. The courthouse was a tall gray monolith against the morning sky, its steps slick with last night's rain. Reporters crowded the entrance, microphones raised, cameras flashing in bursts of white. The story had become national now, its weight too large to contain in headlines. Damien Cross, once celebrated as a visionary, was to stand before the court for financial fraud, falsifying reports, and obstruction of justice. Every window of the courthouse reflected a world waiting to see him fall. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. The echo of footsteps bounced off marble walls. Amelia arrived quietly, wearing a dark suit and no jewelry, her face calm, her hair pinned neatly behind her. She walked beside her attorney, a composed woman in her 40s named Sarah Chen, who carried the case files. They said nothing. The sound of heels striking stone filled the silence. In the courtroom, rows of spectators sat behind wooden barriers. Some were journalists, some victims of Cross Development's failed projects, some merely curious. The hum of conversation stopped when the bailiff called the session to order. Damien entered from the side door, escorted by 2 officers. His expression was hollow. The cameras captured every angle of him, the slight slump of his shoulders, the faint gray at his temples, the way his eyes avoided the gallery. Amelia did not look away when he entered. Her gaze met his once, steady and unreadable. There was no anger there anymore, only clarity. She took her seat at the front, behind the prosecution table, her hands folded on her lap. Sarah leaned in and whispered, "You're certain you want to be here for every hearing?" Amelia nodded. "I need to hear it all." The judge entered, an older man with a measured presence. "Court is now in session," he said. The murmurs ceased, papers shuffled, pens clicked, and the rhythm of justice began. The prosecutor, a young man with sharp diction, stood and addressed the room. "Your Honor, we present evidence that Mr. Cross knowingly diverted investor funds from the Aurora Tower project into private accounts. The amount in question exceeds $28 million. We will also show that Mr. Cross and his associate, Miss Cassandra Moore, falsified financial statements to mislead auditors." A collective intake of breath rippled through the spectators. Damien stared at the desk before him, jaw tight. His lawyer rose, smoothing his suit. "My client maintains his innocence. The alleged evidence was obtained through an illegal breach of confidentiality." The judge raised an eyebrow. "We will determine admissibility after review. Proceed." The prosecutor nodded to an assistant, who wheeled in a cart stacked with folders and a small projector. On the screen appeared copies of emails, wire transfers, and signatures. Each document bore the unmistakable cross-development letterhead. Then came the recording, Damien's own voice instructing staff to merge the files before audit. The sound echoed through the courtroom, slow and deliberate. Damien's face drained of color. He shot a glance toward his lawyer, who scribbled frantic notes. Cassandra, seated behind him, covered her mouth, her mascara streaking faintly. The prosecutor turned toward the witness stand. "We call Miss Amelia Ward to testify." "Ewan." The room shifted. Cameras tilted toward her. Amelia stood, her movements composed but deliberate, and made her way to the stand. She placed one hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. "Miss Ward," the prosecutor began, "you represent A. Ward Holdings, correct?" "Yes." "Can you explain your role in uncovering this evidence?" Her voice was steady. "Our firm reviewed Cross Development's financial structure as part of the partnership agreement. During due diligence, I noticed irregularities in account transfers. Further investigation confirmed they were not authorized by the board." The prosecutor nodded. "Did you personally deliver these findings to the authorities?" "I did," she said, "because the public had the right to know the truth." Her words hung in the air, calm but piercing. The courtroom remained utterly still. Even the judge looked at her for a long moment before continuing. The defense lawyer rose. "Miss Ward," he said, "is it true that you have personal history with my client?" "Yes." "Then isn't it possible your actions were motivated by revenge rather than justice?" Amelia looked directly at him. "No. Revenge seeks pain. Justice seeks truth. I wanted the truth." A low murmur spread through the room. The lawyer hesitated, then sat down. The judge's gavel struck once. "Order." Amelia stepped down from the stand, her footsteps slow but certain. She returned to her seat. Damien watched her pass, but she didn't look at him again. The prosecution continued with its evidence. Witnesses from Cross Development testified, accountants, assistants, engineers, one after another. They confirmed the same pattern of deceit. Damien sat motionless. Each new revelation peeled away another layer of denial until only silence remained. By late afternoon, the air in the courtroom grew heavy. Reporters typed frantically. Outside, the crowd chanted, their voices faint through the glass windows. The judge called a short recess. Amelia rose and walked toward the hallway, pausing near the doorway. Through the reflection on the polished floor, she could see Damien still seated, his head bowed, his hand trembling near his papers. For the first time, he looked small, almost fragile, a man dismantled by the truth he once thought he could control. Sarah joined her quietly. "You don't have to watch anymore," she said. Amelia shook her head. "It's not over yet." The recess ended. They returned to their places. The prosecutor announced, "Your Honor, the prosecution rests for today. The defense will respond tomorrow." The judge nodded. Court adjourned. The gavel struck again, final and echoing. As the officers escorted Damien away, flashes from photographers filled the room, the light harsh and unrelenting. He turned his head once, toward the crowd. The expression on his face was neither defiance nor remorse, only disbelief that his empire had fallen in front of strangers. Amelia remained seated, her hands clasped together. The sound of the gavel still rang faintly in her ears. Around her, people began to leave, the noise of footsteps and whispers filling the space. She looked up at the bench where the judge had sat, the wood dark and solemn beneath the courtroom lights. Then she rose. Her reflection passed over the polished floor, blending with those of the departing crowd. She walked toward the exit without hurry, the air thick with the scent of old paper and rain carried in from outside. At the door, she paused for a brief moment and turned back. The courtroom stood empty now, but the echo of her testimony lingered in the silence. The faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the air, steady and low, as if the building itself was holding its breath for what would come next. The verdict came on a cold afternoon. Outside the courthouse, gray clouds pressed low against the city skyline. Crowds gathered along the barricades, their breath visible in the air, waiting for the outcome that had gripped the nation for weeks. Reporters held microphones ready, cameras aimed at the double doors. The tension hummed like a wire about to snap. Inside, the courtroom was silent, except for the shuffle of papers. The judge reviewed the documents one last time, his expression grave. Damien sat at the defense table, hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His suit hung loose on him now, as though the fabric had given up the illusion of power. Cassandra sat behind him, face pale, avoiding his eyes. The judge's voice filled the room. In light of the evidence presented, this court finds the defendant, Mr. Damien Cross, guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud, falsification of records, and obstruction of justice. Gasps rippled through the gallery, the sound of pens scratching, cameras clicking, and the low hum of whispers followed. Damien's body tensed, his jaw trembling. The judge continued, his tone steady and unyielding. Sentencing will be carried out immediately. Mr. Cross, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in state custody, with the possibility of parole after 10. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to deliver the news first. Damien sat unmoving, eyes fixed on the table. The bailiff approached and touched his shoulder. "Sir, please stand." He didn't move. The officer repeated the command. "Firmer this time." Slowly, Damien rose, his legs unsteady. Across the aisle, Amelia sat still. Her breathing was calm, her gaze steady. She did not smile. Her victory was not one of triumph, but of closure. For a moment, the noise faded, and all she could hear was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above her. A sound so constant, it almost felt like silence. Cassandra broke that silence. She stood abruptly, her voice sharp with panic. "This isn't fair. He built everything they have." She turned toward Amelia. "You did this. You wanted to destroy him because he left you." The bailiff stepped forward, warning her to remain seated. Amelia didn't react. She looked at Cassandra with the same calm she had learned to wear like armor. "He destroyed himself," she said softly. Cassandra's face contorted with rage. She reached out as if to speak again, but the guards were already leading her away for questioning related to her own involvement. Her voice echoed briefly, then disappeared behind the closing door. Damien turned then, slowly, as if pulled by something heavier than his own will. His eyes met Amelia's. For the first time, they looked like two people who had lived through the same storm. His lips parted, but no words came. She did not look away, yet there was no hatred in her face, only an exhausted kind of peace. The guards placed handcuffs on him. The metallic click echoed through the room. Damien's head bowed, and the weight of years collapsed over his shoulders. The man who once stood beneath chandeliers and applause now moved through silence and shame. When they led him past her, he hesitated for half a step. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice raw. "Was it worth it?" She turned her head slightly, her tone calm. "The truth always is." He looked at her for a long second, then let the officers take him away. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to drain the last bit of air from the room. The judge rose, announced the adjournment, and left. The remaining people began to file out, murmuring as they went. Amelia remained seated, her hands folded in her lap. She stared at the empty chair Damien had occupied, at the faint impression left on the leather. It was strange, she thought, how something as simple as a seat could hold the ghost of a person's power. Her lawyer, Sarah, approached quietly. "It's done," she said. Amelia nodded but didn't move. "Yes, it's done." They left the courtroom together, the sound of their steps echoing in the long hallway. The marble floor reflected faint light from the windows, each reflection like ripples in still water. Outside the doors, the crowd surged forward as the verdict became official. Headlines updated in real time. "Cross Empire falls. Justice at last." Amelia paused beneath the courthouse archway. The wind tugged gently at her hair. Reporters shouted her name, cameras flashing. She didn't stop. Security guided her past the chaos toward the waiting car. Inside, the noise faded again, replaced by the hum of the city and the steady beat of her heart. Through the window, she saw the flashing lights of police cars as they escorted Damien's vehicle down the side street toward the detention center. For a moment, she imagined the silence inside that car. No words, no excuses, only the sound of wheels turning toward consequence. Traffic slowed as they passed the courthouse square. A small group of protesters held signs reading "Truth Matters" and "Justice for Investors." Others simply watched quietly, holding their phones high to record the moment. When the car stopped at a light, Amelia looked up at the courthouse steps. The marble glistened under a weak patch of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was the same light she had once watched through hospital windows, faint but persistent. The kind that didn't promise warmth, only endurance. Sarah spoke softly beside her. "You did what you came to do. You can rest now." Amelia shook her head lightly. "Not yet. Rest isn't what this was for." The car turned down another street, leaving the noise behind. The city blurred outside, towers of glass and steel shimmering in the pale light. She thought of the child she had lost, of the nights she had spent talking to silence, asking questions no one could answer. The verdict did not bring her joy, but it brought stillness, the kind that felt like the end of a long storm. As they crossed the bridge out of downtown, the radio inside the car played a news report. The anchor's voice was calm, professional. "Today marks the fall of one of New York's most powerful developers, Damien Cross, found guilty on all charges. The court thanked A. Ward Holdings for its cooperation in the investigation. Public reaction remains mixed, but the consensus is clear. Truth prevailed." Amelia watched the skyline fade in the rearview mirror. The towers gleamed in the distance, unreachable now, reflections of a life that no longer belonged to her. The car slowed near a park where the trees were just beginning to bloom. She exhaled slowly, the air trembling in her chest. The sound of the wind outside mingled with the fading echo of the courthouse behind her. For the first time in a long while, she closed her eyes. The city continued without her, but in that still moment, everything inside her finally went quiet. The noise of triumph, grief, and memory dissolved into silence, the kind that waits for what comes after. A year had passed since the verdict. The world had moved on to new headlines, new scandals, but the name Damien Cross still carried the faint echo of downfall. The Aurora Tower project had been dismantled, its unfinished skeleton standing as a silent monument to arrogance. Across the river, spring returned, softening the city with light and pale blossoms. The storm that once filled every corner of Amelia's life had finally quieted. On a bright morning in early April, a new sign was unveiled in the courtyard of Street Helena's Foundation, the Hope Memorial Center for Women and Children. The marble letters gleamed under the sun, surrounded by rows of white lilies and soft blue hydrangeas. Reporters were few this time. The event was private, small, but deeply human. Volunteers arranged chairs, nurses from nearby clinics helped set up refreshments, and children ran across the lawn, laughing. Amelia stood beneath the archway, watching as a ribbon fluttered in the breeze. She wore a simple ivory dress, her hair loose, her face free of makeup. There was peace in her stillness now. In her hands, she held a small silver bracelet, the same hospital band that once carried her baby's name. For a long moment, she looked at it without speaking. Sarah Chen approached from behind, her voice gentle. "They're waiting for you to say a few words." "No." Amelia nodded, placing the bracelet in her pocket. She walked toward the small podium where the crowd had gathered. The murmur faded as she stepped forward. For a moment, she looked at all the faces, mothers, nurses, survivors, each carrying their own version of a story like hers. "I was once told," she began softly, "that truth comes at a cost, and it does, but silence costs even more." Her voice carried evenly across the courtyard. "This place is for those who had to start again when no one believed they could. It's for women who lost something they can never replace, and yet kept going." She paused, her throat tightening slightly. The air smelled faintly of flowers and rain. "When I lost my child," she continued, "I thought my life had ended with hers. But grief is strange. It doesn't end anything. It reshapes everything. It made me understand that justice is not revenge. Justice is the chance to rebuild, to choose compassion over bitterness." A light breeze brushed past her as she lowered her gaze, letting the silence settle. The crowd didn't clap immediately. They just listened. And in that quiet, something sacred passed between them, a shared understanding of loss and endurance. After the ribbon was cut, Amelia walked through the new building. The hallways were filled with sunlight. Paintings from local artists lined the walls, each one depicting resilience in soft colors. Hands holding, eyes lifting, hearts unbroken. Nurses showed her the counseling rooms, the nursery, the small library filled with books donated by survivors. Everywhere she went, she saw life beginning again. In one room, a group of young women sat with notebooks, listening to a counselor speak about rebuilding careers. One of them stood up as Amelia entered. "You're Miss Ward, right?" she asked shyly. "Thank you for building this place." Amelia smiled faintly. "You built it too." "You all did." The girl hesitated, then asked, "How did you keep going when everything hurt?" Amelia thought for a moment. "I stopped trying to forget," she said quietly. "Instead, I remembered what still mattered." The girl nodded, her eyes glistening. Amelia placed a hand on her shoulder before leaving the room. Outside, the afternoon sun had softened. Volunteers began folding chairs, the scent of lilies stronger now. Sarah joined her again, holding a folder. "Donations came in from overseas," she said. "You've inspired more people than you realize." Amelia looked toward the city skyline across the river. The glass towers gleamed, indifferent but distant now. "I didn't do it to inspire anyone," she said. "I did it to survive." They stood in silence for a while. A small bell from the chapel nearby began to chime. The sound was light, almost fragile. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Amelia lingered by the entrance alone. The sky turned golden, and the light stretched across the courtyard like a blessing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver bracelet again. The letters had faded slightly, but they were still visible, the name that had anchored her through every storm. She knelt near the flower bed and placed the bracelet gently beneath a cluster of white lilies. "You were the beginning," she whispered, "not the end." Her fingers lingered in the soil for a moment before she rose. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of hydrangeas and rain. It brushed against her face like a breath from another time. As she turned to leave, a photographer from the local press called softly, "Miss Ward, may I take one last picture?" She nodded. The camera clicked once. The image captured her standing before the memorial sign, her dress catching the light, her eyes calm and distant, a woman no longer defined by tragedy but by endurance. The photographer lowered the camera. "Thank you," he said. She smiled gently. "For what?" "For reminding us what strength looks like." Amelia didn't answer. She walked down the path lined with lilies, her shadow stretching behind her as the sun dipped lower. The city across the river glowed under the fading light, every window catching fire for a moment before dimming into dusk. When she reached the gate, she turned once more toward the courtyard. The bracelet lay buried beneath the flowers, invisible now but eternal in meaning. She exhaled softly, a breath that sounded like forgiveness. The evening settled into quiet. Somewhere, a child's laughter echoed faintly from the playground nearby. The sky deepened to a shade of blue that seemed almost infinite. Amelia stepped onto the sidewalk, her footsteps slow but steady. The wind lifted the hem of her dress, carrying with it the scent of the lilies she had left behind. And for the first time in years, the silence that followed was not empty. It was whole. It was peace.